On May 9, 2025, the Trump administration sent shockwaves through the legal world. Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller announced that the White House was actively looking at suspending habeas corpus. This ancient legal principle, a cornerstone of Anglo-American law, guarantees the right to challenge one's detention before a court. Miller's statement, made amidst a flurry of aggressive immigration policies, ignited a firestorm of controversy. Could the Trump administration really be considering suspending such a fundamental right? The announcement came as the administration faced mounting legal challenges to its immigration policies. Federal judges across the country had recently issued rulings against the administration, blocking deportations and questioning the use of the Alien Enemies Act. Miller's statement, many argued, was a thinly veiled threat to the judiciary, a sign of the administration's growing frustration with legal constraints. The implications of suspending habeas corpus, even temporarily, are profound. It would grant the executive branch unprecedented power to detain individuals, including citizens, without due process. The potential for abuse is enormous, raising the specter of indefinite detention without trial, a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. Miller's announcement, therefore, was not merely a legal argument, it was a stark warning about the future of American democracy. Habeas corpus, Latin for you shall have the body, is a fundamental legal principle that protects individuals from unlawful and indefinite detention. It is a cornerstone of both English common law and American jurisprudence enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. The writ of habeas corpus empowers courts to review the legality of a person's detention and order their release if the detention is found to be unlawful. This right is not merely an abstract legal concept, it is a vital safeguard against government overreach and tyranny. It ensures that no one, regardless of their citizenship status or alleged crimes, can be imprisoned without just cause and a fair hearing. Habeas corpus is the bedrock of a free society, a bulwark against arbitrary and oppressive government action. The significance of habeas corpus extends far beyond the realm of immigration law. It protects all Americans from unlawful detention, ensuring that the government cannot simply lock up its citizens without due process. It is a cornerstone of the rule of law, a principle that holds that everyone, including the government, is subject to the law. The potential suspension of habeas corpus, therefore, strikes at the very heart of American democracy. It represents a dangerous erosion of fundamental rights, a shift towards executive power that could have far-reaching consequences for all Americans. The history of habeas corpus in the United States is not without its blemishes. The Constitution itself allows for the suspension of the writ in cases of rebellion or invasion. The public safety may require it. However, this power has been used sparingly and always under extraordinary circumstances. The most famous instance of habeas corpus suspension occurred during the Civil War, when President Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ in response to the Confederacy's secession. This suspension, while controversial, was deemed necessary to quell the rebellion and preserve the Union. Other instances of suspension, such as during Reconstruction in parts of South Carolina, in the Philippines in 1905, and in Hawaii after the attack on Pearl Harbor, were also justified on national security grounds. However, these suspensions were not without their critics, who argued that they went too far and infringed upon fundamental rights. These historical examples highlight the gravity of suspending habeas corpus. It is a power reserved for the most dire of circumstances, when the very existence of the nation is at stake. The Trump administration's consideration of suspending the writ in the context of immigration, therefore, raises serious questions about the proportionality and necessity of such a drastic measure. The Trump administration's rationale for considering the suspension of habeas corpus rests on two main arguments: executive authority over immigration and the perceived threat posed by illegal immigration. Stephen Miller, a key architect of the administration's immigration policies, has repeatedly asserted that the president has broad powers to control immigration, citing the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. Miller argues that this law grants the president wide latitude in setting immigration policy and limiting judicial review of those policies. He contends that the courts have overstepped their bounds in recent rulings that have blocked deportations and challenged the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act. Furthermore, the administration has sought to justify its aggressive immigration policies, including the potential suspension of habeas corpus, by portraying illegal immigration as a national security threat. They argue that the influx of undocumented immigrants, particularly those with criminal records, poses a danger to public safety and undermines national sovereignty. However, these arguments have been met with fierce opposition from legal experts, human rights groups, and even some members of the Trump administration's own party. Critics argue that the administration's interpretation of executive power is overly broad and that its characterization of immigrants as a national security threat is both inaccurate and inflammatory. Section 5. Legal experts push back. A chorus of dissent. The Trump administration's musings about suspending habeas corpus have been met with a chorus of condemnation from legal scholars and practitioners across the political spectrum. Experts argue that such a move would be not only morally reprehensible but also blatantly unconstitutional. One of the most vocal critics has been Professor Steve Vladek of Georgetown University Law Center, a renowned expert on constitutional law and national security. Vladek argues that the Constitution unequivocally vests the power to suspend habeas corpus in Congress, not the president. He points out that the administration's reliance on the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act is misplaced, as that law does not override the Constitution's clear language on this matter. Moreover, Vladek and other legal experts emphasize that even if Congress were to authorize a suspension of habeas corpus, such a suspension would have to be narrowly tailored to address a specific national security threat. They argue that the administration's broad-brush approach to immigration enforcement does not meet this threshold. The American Civil Liberties Union, a leading civil rights organization, has also denounced the administration's proposal as a dangerous assault on fundamental freedoms. The ACLU argues that suspending habeas corpus would eviscerate the due process rights of immigrants, leaving them vulnerable to indefinite detention without any meaningful opportunity to challenge their detention in court. Section 6. The courts respond. Recent legal challenges to immigration policies. The Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies have faced mounting legal challenges in recent months, with federal judges across the country issuing rulings that have blocked deportations, questioned the use of the Alien Enemies Act, and affirmed the due process rights of immigrants. One notable case involved the administration's attempt to deport Venezuelan nationals accused of gang affiliation to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act. Federal judges ruled against the administration in several of these cases, finding that the administration had failed to provide sufficient evidence to justify the use of this wartime law against individuals who posed no demonstrable threat to national security. In another case, a federal judge in Massachusetts blocked deportations to Libya and Saudi Arabia, citing concerns about the Trump administration's failure to adequately consider the dangers that deportees would face upon their return to these countries. The judge found that the administration had violated its own regulations by failing to conduct individualized assessments of the risks posed to each deportee. These legal challenges highlight the crucial role of the judiciary in upholding the rule of law and protecting fundamental rights, even in the face of an administration determined to push the boundaries of executive power. The courts have served as a vital check on the Trump administration's immigration policies, ensuring that the government does not overstep its constitutional authority and that the rights of all persons, regardless of their immigration status, are respected. Section 7. A slippery slope. The potential consequences for migrants. The potential consequences of suspending habeas corpus for migrants are dire. Without the ability to challenge their detention in court, migrants could be held indefinitely without due process, subject to the whims of an administration that has repeatedly demonstrated its hostility towards immigrants. The Trump administration has already implemented a number of policies that have eroded the rights of migrants, including the separation of families at the border, the indefinite detention of asylum seekers, and the restriction of access to legal counsel. Suspending habeas corpus would be a logical next step in this campaign to dismantle the legal protections afforded to migrants. Without habeas corpus, migrants facing deportation would be at the mercy of an immigration system that is already notoriously opaque and unfair. They could be deported to countries where they face persecution or even death without any meaningful opportunity to appeal their case. The suspension of habeas corpus would also have a chilling effect on the willingness of migrants to come forward and seek asylum in the United States. Fearing indefinite detention without any recourse to the courts, many migrants would be deterred from exercising their legal right to seek protection in the United States. Section 8. Eroding freedoms, a threat to citizens' rights. While the immediate impact of suspending habeas corpus would be felt most acutely by migrants, the erosion of this fundamental right poses a grave threat to all Americans. The principle of habeas corpus is not limited to any particular group of people. It is a cornerstone of American liberty that protects everyone from arbitrary government detention. If the Trump administration succeeds in suspending habeas corpus for migrants, it would set a dangerous precedent that could be used to justify suspending this right for other groups in the future. The administration has already demonstrated a willingness to target other marginalized communities, such as Muslims and LGBTQ+ individuals, and the suspension of habeas corpus could be used as a tool to further marginalize and silence these groups. Moreover, the erosion of habeas corpus would weaken the rule of law and undermine the very fabric of American democracy. If the government is allowed to detain people without due process, it sets a dangerous precedent that could be used to justify other abuses of power. The suspension of habeas corpus would also have a chilling effect on free speech and dissent. If people fear that they could be detained indefinitely for expressing unpopular views, they are less likely to speak out against government policies. Section 9. A nation at a crossroads, the future of habeas corpus and due process. The Trump administration's consideration of suspending habeas corpus represents a crossroads for the United States. The decision of whether to uphold this fundamental right or to cast it aside in the name of expediency will have profound consequences for the future of American democracy. If the United States abandons its commitment to habeas corpus, it will join the ranks of authoritarian regimes that routinely detain people without trial. It will send a message to the world that the United States no longer values freedom and the rule of law. However, if the United States reaffirms its commitment to habeas corpus, it will send a powerful message that this country remains a beacon of hope and freedom for people around the world. It will demonstrate that the United States is still a nation committed to the principles of liberty and justice for all. The fight over habeas corpus is not just a legal battle, it is a battle for the soul of America. The outcome of this battle will determine what kind of country the United States will be in the years to come.